The great chamber of the conclave of shapers was a monument to silence. It was a silence born not of emptiness, but of immense, patient gravity. Light, ancient and weary from its journey across millennia, filtered through crystalline walls that hummed with the faint, residual energies of their own creation. The air itself, a meticulously balanced composition of noble gases and trace elements soothing to 100 different physiologies, felt heavy, compressed by the sheer weight of history and the momentous decisions that had been made within this sacred, circular space. At the heart of the chamber, a disk of polished obsidian floated, its surface a perfect mirror reflecting the vaulted, star-dusted ceiling above. A cosmos in miniature, every point of light a star system under the Shaper's benevolent, unyielding stewardship. Around this disk sat the delegates, beings of such diversity that the very concept of a single biological form seemed a quaint limitation of primitive worlds. There were the Cathar, crystalline entities whose thoughts echoed in chimes of pure logic, their faceted bodies refracting the ancient light into rainbows of cold reason. Beside them slumped the Grawl amorphous, silicon-based lifeforms who communicated in slow, deliberate shifts of color and texture across their gelatinous hides, their wisdom as deep and patient as the geological ages they had witnessed. And there was Elder Vorlag, the speaker for the Vex Imperium, a towering insectoid creature whose carapace was etched with the lineage of 1,000 warrior kings, his multifaceted eyes seeing all angles of a problem, his mandibles clicking softly in a rhythm of deep, controlled agitation. The subject of their silent contemplation, the source of the profound disquiet that had settled over their ancient and ordered galaxy, was a single, insignificant species from a forgotten spiral arm. They were a people called humans. For cycles, they had been a footnote in the grand cosmic library, a species of interest only to the most obscure xenopaleontologists, noted for their chaotic social structures, their penchant for self-destruction, and their astonishingly rapid, if brutish, technological ascent. They were considered an anomaly, a violent but ultimately self-limiting fevered dream of a world, destined to burn out before they could ever truly touch the stars. But they had not burned out. They had reached and they had grasped, and now their faint, noisy signals, their crude, fission-powered vessels, were beginning to push at the very edges of the Shaper's established sphere of influence. The data streams flowed across the obsidian disk, painting a portrait of the species that was both laughable and terrifying. Their ships were monstrosities of primitive design, welded plates of metal propelled by controlled explosions, leaking radiation and broadcasting a cacophony of meaningless noise into the void. Their communications were a chaotic storm of sentiment, contradiction, and what the Shaper's translation algorithms could only classify as art, a concept utterly alien to their own purpose-driven existence. Elder Vorlag broke the oppressive silence, his voice a dry, rasping whisper that carried the authority of ages. They expand without purpose, they move without a guiding philosophy, their ships are weak, their energy signatures are contemptible, their strategies are non-existent, and yet they persist. His multifaceted eyes swept across the assembled delegates, lingering for a moment on the shimmering form of the Cathar Prime. You have analyzed their transmissions, Prime Executor. Your logic engines have sifted through their chaos. What have you concluded? The Cathar Prime's crystalline form pulsed with a soft, internal luminescence. Its response was not spoken, but resonated directly within the minds of all present, a series of pure, unassailable logical propositions. Conclusion: the species designated human is a paradox. Their technological trajectory is impossibly steep. Their energy expenditure is inefficient to the point of absurdity. Their social structures are predicated on emotional states that defy rational modeling. They are, by every metric of the Shaper Compact, a failed species, and yet they have mastered technologies that should be centuries beyond their grasp. They have colonized worlds that should be uninhabitable to their fragile biology. They are weak, but they are undeniably present. A slow, undulating wave of deep violet washed over the Grawl delegate, its formless body quivering slightly. The translation was slow, ponderous like the grinding of continents. We have felt them, it communicated, its thoughts carrying the texture of stone and deep time. Their arrival in a system is not a quiet integration, it is a disruption. The very fabric of space-time around them seems to protest. They are loud, loud in a way that nothing in this galaxy has been before. It is not the loudness of power, but the loudness being, it is unsettling. This was the crux of their fear. It was not a fear of military conquest. The combined fleets of the Shaper Compact could sterilize the human home system with a casual expenditure of energy, a footnote in their military budget. Their ships were living metal, their weapons could unmake suns, their shields could withstand the fury of a supernova. Humanity, with its projectile weapons and fission reactors, was not a threat. It was an irritant. An illogical, unpredictable, and deeply unsettling irritant. The fear was of contamination. The fear was that the chaos inherent in the human species, their raw, untamed emotionality, their irrational art, their violent and passionate existence, was a mimetic virus that could infect the serene, ordered perfection of the Shapers' millennia-old civilization. "They do not respect the silence," Vorlag continued, his mandibles clicking with more insistence. "They fill the void with their noise, their stories, their music. They transmit depictions of their own history, a litany of self-inflicted horrors, and they seem to feel no shame. They broadcast it as a warning, perhaps, but also as a celebration of their survival. They celebrate suffering. They find strength in their own acknowledged weakness. This is a philosophy of madness." The debate continued for what felt like an eternity, a slow, deep current of philosophical discourse and strategic planning. The Shapers were a civilization that had conquered the very concept of haste. They had deliberated for centuries on the precise orbital mechanics of a new colony world, for millennia on the ethical implications of uplifting a presentient species. They would not rush to a conclusion about humanity. Some argued for quarantine, a silent, impenetrable energy barrier erected around the human sphere of influence, leaving them to their inevitable self-destruction. Others, the more pragmatic and militaristic factions like Vorlag's Vex Imperium, argued for preemptive pacification. A swift, overwhelming show of force to cauterize the wound before the infection could spread. It would not be a war, but a sanitation. But a third option was proposed, one born of the deep, abiding curiosity that had always been the flip side of the Shapers, caution. It was championed by Lyra, the delegate from the Cygnian Ascendancy, a species of graceful, avian-like beings whose minds operated on a level of intuitive, multi-layered consciousness that often baffled the more linear thinkers of the conclave. She stood, her slender form draped in robes that seemed woven from captured starlight, her voice a melody of soft, flute-like notes. "We observe a shadow on a cave wall and presume to know the creature that casts it," she sang, her words weaving a tapestry of metaphor and gentle rebuke. "We have analyzed their signals, their leaked data, their primitive machines, but we have not analyzed them. We have not looked into their eyes. We have not listened to the silence between their chaotic words. Their weakness may be a mask. Their chaos may be a language we do not yet understand. To judge them without meeting them, to condemn them without understanding them, is that not a weakness in ourselves? Is that not an act of fear unworthy of the name Shaper?" Her words hung in the chamber, a shimmering counterpoint to the heavy, pragmatic arguments that had preceded them. Fear. It was a concept the Shapers had long believed they had transcended, a primitive emotion relegated to the lesser species they protected. But Lyra had given it a name and laid it bare on the obsidian disk for all to see. They were afraid. Afraid of the unknown. Afraid of a species that did not fit their models, that did not follow the predictable, ordained path of cosmic evolution. A consensus began to form, slow and reluctant, like a tide turning against a deep-sea current. They would not quarantine, they would not sterilize, not yet. They would send an envoy. A single vessel, but one that represented the pinnacle of Shaper technology and authority. A ship that was both an olive branch and an unassailable symbol of their power. It would travel to the edge of human space, it would make contact, and it would deliver a simple, unspoken message. We are here. We are watching. Do not test the patience of a galaxy that has forgotten the meaning of war. The vessel chosen was the Vigilance of Stars, a ship from the Vex Imperium's own fleet, commanded by Vorlag's most trusted protege, a stern and unyielding warrior diplomat named Kalen. It was not their largest warship, nor their most destructive, but it was their most advanced. Its hull was a seamless obsidian alloy that could phase shift through solid matter. Its engines drew power directly from the quantum foam, and its sensor suite could map the neural activity of an entire continent from high orbit. It was a ghost, a scalpel, a god machine. Aboard it would be a delegation representing the key factions of the conclave, Kalen himself, a Cathar logic priest to analyze the data, and at Lyra's insistence, a Cygnian empath to gauge the unspoken currents of human intention. Their mission was simple: to approach the humans, to observe them directly, and to make a final, definitive assessment. Were they a disease to be purged, or a curiosity to be contained? No one in the great chamber, in their most expansive and imaginative moments, considered a third possibility. No one conceived that they were about to encounter not a shadow on a cave wall, but a light so different from their own that it would force them to redefine the very meaning of existence. The obsidian disk at the center of the chamber remained silent, its mirrored surface reflecting the distant, unknowable stars from which this strange, weak, and terrifying new species had emerged. The age of the Shapers was one of peace, order, and absolute certainty, and it was about to end. The journey of the vigilance of stars was a silent passage through perfection. Inside the vessel, there was no sense of motion. The fabric of spacetime was not so much traversed as it was persuaded to fold, bringing destinations to the ship rather than the ship to the destinations. Kalen stood on the command bridge, a cavernous, darkened space where the only light came from the holographic displays that bloomed like spectral flowers in the air around him. The ship was an extension of his own body. Its senses were his senses, its thoughts a reflection of his own rigid discipline. He was a Vex of the highest caste, his mind a fortress of duty and tradition, his spirit forged in the crucible of his people's long and glorious history of bringing order to the unruly corners of the galaxy. He looked out at the swirling vortex of hyperspace, a river of impossible colors, and felt nothing but a cold, clean sense of purpose. With him on the bridge were the other members of the delegation. The Cathar logic priest, designated Unit 734, stood motionless in its charging alcove, its crystalline mind directly interfaced with the ship's primary data core, sifting through the torrent of information pouring in from their long-range sensors. It was already processing everything known about humanity, every scrap of data the Conclave had ever collected, searching for patterns, for exploitable flaws in their logic, for the key that would unlock the puzzle of their unpredictable nature. In another part of the bridge, the Signian empath, Alara, sat in a meditative trance, her feathered crest glowing with a soft, internal light. Her role was one Kalen did not understand, and if he were to be honest with himself, did not trust. She was there to feel the humans, to sense their emotional state, their collective consciousness. To a Vex, this was tantamount to consulting the random patterns of cosmic dust for strategic advice. Emotions were a weakness, a flaw in the code of life, not a source of reliable data. "We are approaching the designated system," Kalen's voice rasped, cutting through the near-total silence of the bridge. "Energy signatures detected, they are primitive, as expected." On the main holographic display, a schematic of the target system resolved itself. It was a typical G-type star, orbited by a handful of rocky planets and gas giants. On the third planet, a world of blue oceans and swirling white clouds, the signs of industrial civilization were an ugly scar on the landscape, but it was the space around it that drew their focus. A scattered collection of objects drifted in orbit, satellites, space stations, and a few dozen ships. The vigilance of stars, sensors analyzed them in a nanosecond, and the report was, to Kalen, almost insulting. They were propelled by chemical rockets and crude ion drives. Their hulls were thick, unrefined metal alloys. Their power sources were fission reactors, leaky and inefficient, spewing a cocktail of hard radiation into the void. Unit 734's synthesized voice echoed in the chamber, devoid of any inflection. Analysis complete. The human vessels pose a threat level of 0.01 on the Shaper Threat Index. Their weaponry consists primarily of kinetic projectiles and directed energy weapons in the low megajoule range. Their shields are simple magnetic containment fields. Our vessel could withstand their combined firepower for approximately 10,000 standard years before sustaining superficial damage to the outer hull. Kalen's mandibles clicked in a gesture of grim satisfaction. It was as the Conclave had predicted. They were primitives playing with firecrackers, blissfully unaware of the true, sun-shattering power that resided in the galaxy. He gave the order to Decloak to reveal their presence. The vigilance of stars did not arrive with a flash of light or a thunderous explosion. One moment there was empty space. The next, the ship was simply there. It hung in the high orbit of the blue world, a sliver of impossible darkness against the back. K-drop of the stars, its form seamless and menacing, absorbing all light, reflecting nothing. It was a hole in reality, a physical manifestation of a power so absolute it had no need for ostentatious display. The human response was immediate and, to Kalen, predictably chaotic. A flood of electromagnetic radiation washed over their ship, radio waves, microwaves, laser pulses. It was their attempt at communication, a panicked, disorganized babble of 100 different languages and protocols. Unit 734 effortlessly filtered, translated, and analyzed the deluge. Content analysis. Initial transmissions consist of threat alerts, declarations of surprise, and multiple queries for identification. There is a high degree of statistical deviation in their responses, indicating a lack of centralized command and control. They are confused. Let them be confused, Kalen rasped. Clarity will come soon enough. Transmit the standard shaper greeting. One language, one protocol. Let them see what true unity looks like. A single, powerful beam of information, encoded in the universal language of mathematics and physics, was projected from the vigilance of stars. It was a message of peace, but its subtext was one of unassailable authority. It detailed the history of the Shaper Compact, its vastness, its power, and its desire for order and stability in the galaxy. It was an offer to a lesser species to know their place, to accept the stewardship of their betters, and to cease their disruptive expansion. The chaotic human chatter ceased abruptly. A profound silence fell over their communication networks, as if a single, collective breath was being held. Kalen allowed the silence to stretch, to become a weapon in itself. Let them contemplate the sheer scale of the power they were facing. Let them understand the futility of resistance. Then a single response came. It was not a broadcast to all their ships, but a tightly focused, directional beam aimed directly at the vigilance of stars. It was calm. It was coherent. It was in perfect, unaccented Shaper standard dialect, a language that should have been impossible for them to know, let alone speak with such fluency. Vessel of the Shaper Compact, this is the United Nations ship, Endeavor. We welcome you to the Sol system. We have been expecting you. Kalen's antennae twitched, the first involuntary reaction he had shown since the mission began. Unit 734's internal lights flickered in a pattern that, for the crystalline being, might have been surprise. Ilara, the Cygnian empath, opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on the holographic display. Their emotional signature, she whispered, her voice a soft, wondering chime. It is calm, there is no fear, there is curiosity, there is patience. On the main display, a visual feed appeared. It was not of a human admiral in a pristine uniform on the bridge of a mighty warship. It was a single human, a woman with dark hair tied back from her face, her features placid, her eyes intelligent and direct. She wore a simple, functional gray jumpsuit. The room behind her was not a military bridge, but something that looked more like a laboratory or a quiet observation deck. There were no flashing lights, no alarms, no sense of crisis. I am Captain Eva Rostova, the woman said, her voice steady and clear. I speak for the human presence in this system. We understand your concerns. We have studied your history and your philosophy from the faint signals that have reached us over the centuries. We acknowledge your desire for order. We share it. Kalen felt a surge of something he had not felt since he was a young larva in the spawning pools of Vex Prime. Uncertainty. This was not the reaction of a primitive species confronted by a god. This was the calm, measured response of an equal. You have studied us, Kalen transmitted, his voice laced with cold skepticism. Your sensors are incapable of resolving details at such distances. Your understanding must be incomplete. Captain Rostova allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to touch her lips. Our sensors are perhaps more capable than you assume, but understanding is not merely about collecting data, is it? It is about interpretation, empathy. We have listened to the silence between your stars for a long time, the silence of a galaxy that has grown old and fears change. Before Kalen could formulate a response, something happened that sent a ripple of genuine shock through the command bridge of the Vigilance of Stars. One of the human ships began to move. It detached itself from the loose formation orbiting the planet and began to approach them on a slow, deliberate course. Kalen's tactical display flared to life, analyzing the vessel. The report was an affirmation of everything they already knew. It was, by Shaper standards, an abomination. Its design was asymmetrical, a hodgepodge of different modules bolted together. Its energy signature was pathetically weak, barely registering above the background radiation of the system. Its hull was scarred and pitted, bearing the marks of countless repairs. It was, without a doubt, the single weakest, most pathetic-looking vessel in the entire human fleet. It was the ship designated Endeavor. They are sending this derelict to meet us. Kalen's voice was a low growl of disbelief. Is this an insult, a gesture of contempt? Unit 734's voice was flat, but Kalen could detect a subroutine of logical dissonance in its synthesized tones. The vessel's specifications are illogical. Its mass-to-energy ratio is inefficient. Its structural integrity is questionable. According to our models, it should not be capable of stable interstellar flight. And yet it moves with a precision that contradicts its design. The drive signature is unusual. It is not fission. It is not fusion. It is quiet. The Endeavor came to a stop a respectful distance from the vigilance of stars, a gnat hovering before a mountain. On the view screen, Captain Rostova was still watching them, her expression serene. "The Endeavor is our oldest ship," she said, as if sensing their thoughts. "She has served us for over a century. She is a symbol of our past, of our humble beginnings. We thought it was appropriate that she be the one to greet the oldest civilization in the galaxy." She paused, and her gaze seemed to become more intense, more focused. "She is also a symbol of our future. We humans have a habit of upgrading things. We do not discard the old. We honor it. We learn from it. And then we make it better." Kalen narrowed his multifaceted eyes. "Your upgrades are irrelevant. Your technology is fundamentally limited. You are bound by the laws of physics, laws that we have mastered while your ancestors were still painting on cave walls." "Are we?" Captain Rostova asked softly, and then she gave a quiet command, one not directed at the Shapers but to her own ship. "Show them." What happened next was not a weapon firing. It was not an energy beam or a projectile. It was something far more profound, far more terrifying. The space around the Endeavor began to change. The stars behind it did not just twinkle, they bent. They warped. Light itself seemed to curve around the small, ugly human ship as if it were an object of immense gravitational pull. The advanced sensors of the vigilance of stars, capable of detecting the faintest quantum fluctuations, suddenly screamed with a flood of impossible data. The Endeavor was not emitting energy. It was absorbing it. It was drinking the energy of the vacuum, the zero-point energy of spacetime itself, a source of power the Shapers had theorized was possible, but had deemed far too unstable, too dangerous to ever attempt to harness. And then the ship itself began to transform. The crude, bolted-on plates of its hull flowed like liquid metal, reforming into a seamless crystalline structure. The asymmetrical modules retracted and reconfigured themselves with a silent, fluid grace. The pitted, scarred surface became a smooth, mirrored black, identical in composition to the hull of the vigilance of stars itself. The weak, pathetic energy signature vanished, replaced by a signature of absolute, unnerving silence. The ship was no longer consuming energy. It was simply existing. It was in a state of perfect equilibrium with the universe around it, its internal systems powered by a principle that the Shapers, science, had no name for. On the bridge of the Vex warship, there was a silence that was deeper and more profound than any that had ever graced the conclave chamber. Kalen stared, his warrior's mind, which had faced down novas and navigated the gravity wells of black holes, unable to process what it was seeing. It was a violation, a perversion of the natural order. Unit 734's synthesized voice was strained, its logical processors pushed to the point of catastrophic failure. "Data is not possible. The vessel is exhibiting properties of negative mass. It is simultaneously in multiple quantum states. It is not a ship. It is a localized, self-contained paradox, a piece of spacetime that has been taught to think." Alara the Cygnian let out a soft, shuddering gasp. She was not looking at the ship, but at the face of Captain Rostova on the screen. The calm was still there, but underneath it, Alara could now feel a vast, deep, and ancient sadness. It was the melancholy of a species that had seen too much, that had been forced to learn too quickly. How, Kalen finally managed to rasp, the single word a betrayal of his shock, a crack in the fortress of his Vex discipline. Captain Rostova's expression softened, the serene mask of the diplomat replaced by the weary face of a teacher explaining a difficult concept to a child. "You see weakness," she said, her voice gentle. "You see chaos. You see a primitive species. You are not wrong. That is what we were. That is a part of what we still are. Our history is a litany of failures, of F-inflicted wounds, but we have a strength that your philosophy has never accounted for. We have desperation." She gestured to the transformed ship floating in the void. "This is not a weapon, Kalen of the Vex. This is a key, a tool. It was born not from a desire for conquest, but from the terror of annihilation. For a long time now, we have been listening to something else out there in the dark, not the faint whispers of your ancient empire, something much older, something much, much colder." The holographic display on the vigilance of stars bridge shifted. The image of the Endeavor was replaced by a complex waveform, a signal map of deep space. It was a repeating, structured signal, but it was unlike any natural or artificial signal the Shapers had ever encountered. It was a signal that seemed to leach the very energy from the space through which it passed, a whisper of absolute entropy. "We call it the silence," Captain Rostova said, her voice barely a whisper now. "It is not a message, it is a presence, an absence, a pattern that moves between the galaxies, and wherever it goes, the light of stars and civilizations simply goes out. We first detected it a century ago when it brushed against the edge of our own galaxy. We saw the lights of 1,000 star systems vanish over the course of a single year. We knew we were next." She looked at Kalen, her eyes filled with a profound, shared weariness that transcended species, that spoke the universal language of survival. "Your compact, for all its power, is an empire of peace. You have forgotten how to be afraid. You have forgotten how to innovate out of sheer animal terror. We never had that luxury. Fear is the engine of our evolution. The endeavor is not the product of our genius. It is the product of our nightmares. We had to learn to bend the rules of the universe, because we knew that if we did not, the universe would break us." Kalen stood silent, the foundations of his world, of his entire civilization's understanding of the cosmos, crumbling around him. The humans were not a disease to be purged. They were not a curiosity to be contained. They were the galaxy's first, and perhaps last, immune response to a contagion he had never even known existed. The weakest ship in their fleet was not a ship at all. It was a nightmare, yes, but it was not a nightmare they had built to use against the Shapers. They had built it to fight the dark. The report from the Vigilance of Stars arrived at the conclave of Shapers not as a data stream, but as a shockwave. It tore through the ancient, hallowed chamber with the force of a physical blow, shattering millennia of certainty and self-assurance. The long, patient silence that had been the hallmark of their civilization was replaced by a new kind of silence, one born of awe, disbelief, and a dawning, cosmic dread. The holographic logs played out on the great obsidian disk, the calm, unassuming human captain, the grotesque, primitive ship, and then the impossible, reality-defying transformation. The delegates watched as the laws of physics, the sacred and immutable principles upon which their entire technological and philosophical edifice was built, were not just broken, but contemptuously rewritten by a species they had dismissed as little more than clever barbarians. When the log concluded, displaying the final, chilling image of the intergalactic signal the humans called the silence, the chamber was so still that the faint hum of the crystalline walls sounded like a roar. Elder Vorlag, the proud warrior patriarch of the Vex, was slumped in his seat, his multifaceted eyes, which had witnessed the birth of stars and the death of empires, staring blankly at the empty disk. The concepts his mind was trying to reconcile were simply too vast, too contradictory. Weakness was strength. Chaos was discipline. Fear was the engine of salvation. These were not mere paradoxes, they were heresies against the very religion of logic and order that had guided his people for eons. It was Lyra, the Cygnian delegate, who finally spoke, her voice a soft, sorrowful melody that seemed to absorb the chamber's collective shock. "We looked out into the galaxy and saw only our own reflection," she sang, her words not an accusation but a lament. "We saw order, we saw logic, we saw purpose, because that is all we were willing to see. The humans, they looked out into the same galaxy and saw the dark. And instead of building walls to hide from it, they forged a light to hold it back." The Cathar Prime, whose logical processes had been pushed to the brink by the Vigilance of Stars data feed, began to pulse with a frantic, violet light. Its telepathic voice, usually a model of calm, dispassionate reason, was now a cascade of fragmented, recursive propositions. The threat assessment was incorrect. The model was incomplete. The fundamental axioms are flawed. A species that evolves under existential pressure of this magnitude, our capacity for technological and philosophical adaptation is infinite. We did not miscalculate their strength. We failed to comprehend the very nature of strength itself. A great and terrible debate began, one that would redefine the Shaper Compact forever. The militarists, led by a humbled and shaken Vorlag, did not speak of pacification now, but of alliance. The pragmatists did not speak of quarantine, but of integration. The scholars and philosophers spoke of a great, terrifying new age of discovery, one where the old, comfortable certainties were dead, and the only path forward was into the unknown, alongside the one species in the galaxy that had already made the unknown its home. They were a civilization that had achieved perfection and in doing so had stagnated. They had solved every problem, answered every question, and had settled into a long, slow, peaceful decline, a golden autumn that would have lasted for millions of years. But the humans, in their desperate, terrified, and brilliant struggle for survival, had brought them the one thing they had forgotten they needed: a reason to exist. They had a new problem to solve, a new question to answer. What lay waiting in the great, silent dark between the galaxies? The vote was a formality. A message was dispatched to the Sol system, not from a warship this time, but from the conclave itself. It was not a demand or a warning, but a request, an admission of their own blindness, an offer of partnership. It was an acknowledgement that the Shapers, for all their ancient wisdom and power, did not have all the answers, and a plea to the young, chaotic species from a forgotten world to help them find them. The alliance that was forged in the months that followed was unlike any in the history of the galaxy. It was a true symbiosis, a fusion of the old and the new. The Shapers offered their vast resources, their mastery of materials science and energy manipulation, their centuries of accumulated data. They opened their archives, their star charts, their secret places. In return, the humans offered their greatest asset, their desperate, unrelenting, and terrifyingly effective ingenuity. They shared the physics of the Endeavor's drive, the principles of manipulating spacetime not as a force to be overcome, but as a medium to be sculpted. They taught the Shapers about resilience, about adaptation, about the strange and powerful alchemy of hope forged in the fires of despair. Human engineers and scientists began to work alongside Vex technicians and Cathar logic priests. Shaper shipyards, which for 10,000 years had produced the same perfect designs, were now filled with the chaotic, beautiful energy of human innovation. New ships began to emerge, vessels that blended the elegant, living metal of the Shapers with the paradoxical, reality-bending technology of humanity. They were not ships of war, nor were they ships of exploration in the traditional sense. They were ships built for a single, solemn purpose, to stand watch, to listen, and if necessary, to act. Kalen, the once proud commander of the Vigilance of Stars, found himself in a new and unexpected role. He became the military liaison to the human command, working side by side with Captain Eva Rostova. The fortress of his Vex discipline had been breached, but what had flooded in was not chaos, but a profound and humbling respect. He saw in Rostova and her people a strength he had never conceived of, a strength that was not measured in firepower or shield capacity, but in the quiet, unyielding refusal to surrender to the dark. He learned about courage, not as the absence of fear, but as the mastery of it. He even, to his own astonishment, began to understand their art, their music, their stories, seeing them not as meaningless noise, but as the very code of their survival, the complex algorithms of hope and resilience that had allowed them to face the abyss and not flinch. One cycle after the first contact, a new fleet hung in the silent void of the Sol system. It was a fleet of unimaginable power and diversity, a testament to the union of two civilizations. The graceful, organic cruisers of the Cygnian Ascendancy flew alongside the stark, formidable battle carriers of the Vex Imperium. Shimmering crystalline vessels of the Cathar floated beside ships of Graal design, which looked less like machines and more like small, captured moons. And at the heart of this grand armada leading them all was a single, small, unassuming ship, the UNS Endeavor. It still looked like a relic, a piece of ancient history, for the humans had insisted on preserving its original, ugly, beautiful form. But every being in that fleet, from the lowest technician to the highest fleet admiral, knew that it was the single most powerful object ever created by sentient hands. It was the ship that had taught a galaxy the true meaning of power. On the bridge of the Vigilance of Stars, now retrofitted with human paradoxical technology and serving as the joint command vessel, Kalen stood beside Captain Rostova. They looked out at the assembled fleet, a sight that would have been unthinkable just a short time ago. It was a fleet born of fear, but united in purpose. The first long-range sensor probes are ready to be deployed into intergalactic space, Kalen said, his voice a low, respectful rasp. They are equipped with the new Shaper human comms array. If there is anything to find in the direction of the silence, they will find it. Rostova nodded, her gaze fixed on the stardusted infinity beyond the viewscreen. They will find something, she said, her voice quiet but certain. The universe is never truly empty. As if on cue, a communication officer's voice cut through the quiet hum of the bridge. Captain Admiral Kalen, we're receiving something. It's not the silence, it's something else. Coming from the same direction, but on a completely different frequency. It's old, very, very old. An audio signal was patched through to the main speakers. It was not a voice. It was not data. It was a sound that seemed to resonate in the very bones, a deep, mournful, and impossibly ancient chord of music. It was a melody of profound loss, of a grief that had spanned eons. And woven within it, almost too faint to detect, was a repeating sequence of tones, a simple, mathematical beacon. Unit 734, its crystalline form now integrated into the bridge of the Vigilance, analyzed the signal. Its voice was no longer flat and synthesized, but carried a new, subtle inflection of wonder. The signal is a lament. The music composition follows complex harmonic rules unknown to this galaxy. The beacon, however, is a distress call. It is encoded in a prime number sequence that could only be artificial. Based on redshift analysis and signal degradation, its point of origin is outside our local galactic cluster, and its age is estimated to be older than the galaxy itself. Kalen and Rostova looked at each other, the same unspoken thought passing between them. They had prepared themselves to fight a voiceless, cosmic horror, an enemy of pure entropy. They had built a fleet to face the silence, but they had never considered that they might not be the first to do so. They had never imagined that out there, in the vast, terrifying emptiness between the galaxies, something else was not just dying, but was crying out for help. A signal from a civilization so ancient it predated their own stars. A silent testament to a war that had been raging in the dark long before they had ever looked up at the sky. The silence was not the only thing waiting for them. It was not an enemy, it was a weapon, and its target, they now realized with a chilling certainty, was not them. It was the source of this ancient, heartbreaking song. Rostova turned to Kalen, her eyes reflecting the endless sea of stars before them. The weariness was gone, replaced by a fierce, burning resolve that he now recognized as the defining characteristic of her species. "We thought our story was about survival," she said, "but it seems it's about something more." Kalen looked out at the fleet, at the combined might of two great civilizations, turned not inward in fear, but outward in shared purpose. He finally understood. The humans had not just given the Shapers a reason to exist, they had given them a reason to be noble. "Plot a course," Kalen commanded, his voice ringing with an authority he had not felt since the day his worldview had been shattered. It was not the authority of a conqueror, but of a protector. "Take us to the source of that signal, maximum speed." The great fleet, a union of ancient order and young, defiant life, turned as one towards the great, starless void. They moved not to conquer, nor merely to survive, but to answer a call that had been echoing unheard through the cosmos for billions of years. They went to offer aid, to stand with an unknown, unseen ally against a darkness vaster than any of them had ever imagined. The age of the Shapers was over. The age of the galaxy had begun.